Uh, I hope everybody's having an amazing Laracon. It's been great so far, and Caleb is a kind of a hard act to follow, but I'm going to do my best. This is going to be a little bit less technical. This is going to be kind of a combination of business and technical and product and strategy. So I hope you enjoyed the break, and I hope you enjoy this. This talk is roughly named Creating $1 Million SaaS Open Source Business in Laravel. I really wanted to say a nearly $1 million SaaS open source business in Laravel. However, it would not actually fit on my slide. So just to know, just so you know who I am, my real name is Allison Giannato. I go by Snipe. I am Snipey Head on the Twitters. I am president of Grokability Inc., of which the product we're going to talk to you about today is the flagship product. I'm the primary dev on that product, and I've been in PHP and open source and also closed for about 20 years. I've been in Snipe on IRC for probably about that long. I also made a couple of other projects like Band Builder, which is a PHP profanity filter library, Less Than Threes, Downworthy, and a website I will not name because I don't know what the language policy is for Laracon. So what I really want to talk to you about today, though, is I want to tell you the story about what I learned from turning my kind of hobby side project, free open source Laravel project into a nearly $1 million year business. And this is really geared towards people who, whether you have a hobby you're thinking about monetizing that, you know, per Caleb and Ian is never going to ship, or whether you're considering starting a new business and you're thinking about possibly open sourcing it. And so, as I said, we're going to be touching on business, product, and some technical challenges, not just with free open source software, but specific to Laravel. So, unfortunately, now, before you freak out, this is not a sales pitch. The reason why I'm bringing up this particular product is because this is my journey, and I kind of need to explain to you a little bit more about what this product is so that you can have the context for what that really means. So SNIPE-IT is an open source IT asset management system written in Laravel. If you're not specifically an IT/desktop support nerd, you may not know what asset management is. Roughly stated, it is, for example, when your company hires a new person, they get issued a laptop, they get issued licenses, they get issued potentially keyboards and things like that. If that person leaves your company, you need to know that you've gotten that stuff back, and you need to be able to, at any point in time, know where a specific machine is. And so the reason why I wrote this was because I was the CTO of an ad agency in New York City with a very small outsourced IT department. And we were moving offices. So of course you have to do a big inventory to make sure that everything gets moved, right? And because we did not have an IT asset management system in place, by the time everything was all said and done and I reconciled invoices for machines that were bought and contacted all of our employees to find out what machines they had, we had over $25,000 worth of assets that were actually missing. So I started my journey into trying to find an IT asset management system that would solve that problem. And I tried a whole bunch of open source solutions. There are very, very expensive commercial systems like $10,000, $20,000 a year or more. I wanted to stay open source because my company was kind of cheap. And I tried a few, and a lot of them were almost there, but not quite. And so I wrote a ridiculously long pull request to try and fix that problem, which they subsequently did not merge. In their defense, it was far too big of a pull request, and it was a bad idea. And I argue that you should never make a pull request that was as big as that one. I believe that particular product has actually taken their stuff closed source now. But so now you know what asset management is. You have kind of an idea of what SNIPE-IT is. You know, the question now is why open source? I wouldn't have a career without open source. So for me, it's a really personal decision, and it's one that I am really comfortable with. Also, broke organizations need good tools too. And in this space, there is literally free, and there is literally, holy crap, that's so expensive, I can't even believe it. There's a whole bunch of good stuff and bad stuff in between. But also there's kind of a business use case here too. Word of mouth from GitHub, I think, profoundly helped the business grow. So I want to give you just kind of a brief timeline. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this specifically. But so SNIPE-IT was created in 2013 on Laravel 4. I wrote it over my Christmas vacation. The current dev branch is on Laravel 6, and I'm super excited to get it onto Laravel 7, although a little panicked. We are licensed under the AGPL. We've had 159 releases to date, And in 2015, I decided to turn it into a business. I should clarify, I didn't really decide to turn it into a business. To be totally honest, my husband nagged me over and over and over to start charging for it. And of course, I'm like, why would anyone pay for this? It's literally free. And finally, to get him to shut up, we were running a WordPress website for the product part itself. To get him to shut up, I literally just installed a PayPal WordPress plugin. And 3 days later, I had our first customer. And I'm like, oh crap, I was not actually expecting that. So we currently have over 2,000 customers, and our primary customers are IT managers, IT directors, and of those customers, a vast majority of those people are schools and governments. So, as I said, we lost about $25,000 worth of assets, which is a little terrifying, actually, and it's really hard to explain when you're kind of in charge of the IT department. How do you explain that to your bosses? So the history of SNIPE-IT is a FOSS product. So it started out with just assets. Later on, we expanded to licenses, accessories like keyboards, components like hard drives, RAM, consumables like printer ink, and then kits, which are kind of the concept of every single person who gets hired for this company is going to have this combination of assets, licenses, accessories, components, etc., and maintenances. Currently, our team is 5.5 people. I say 5.5 just because we do have one part-timer, our QA engineer, who I'm hoping will join us full-time soon. We do not have any sales staff at all, and really don't make any. I think we tried Google AdWords for a little bit, and it just didn't show us enough to make it worth it. This iteration of SNIPE-IT is very API-focused design. And because of that, we've gotten lots of third-party integrations, for example, Jamf, PowerShell, and so we list all of those on our README. The reason why we chose API focused is because in my experience in the IT space, what you end up with, regardless of how good a product thinks it is or how comprehensive it's supposed to be, what generally happens is most organizations have some collection of bespoke scripts that are kind of cobbled together. And so rather than trying to fight that and trying to make a product that was literally everything to everybody, we just figured we'd make a really kick-ass API, and then people could build their own scripts, their own bespoke scripts, which would then talk to our database. So one thing about SNIPE-IT, even the hosted product, we don't do multi-tenancy. And the reason why I made that decision was because for more enterprisey customers, they get a little squirrely when you are dealing with shared databases. So we specifically decided that we were not going to go multi-tenant. So each customer gets their own database. And frankly, it protects customers from my crappy PHP code. Like, let's be honest. And another reason is that 99.999% of users simply don't need it. Most of our customers are doing single installs. Most of our customers and users, I should say. And also, frankly, there is also the possibility that somebody, even under our license, could literally clone my repo and then start hosting this, and so basically making it a little bit more difficult to steal my business. It wasn't on purpose, but it works out to be kind of an added benefit. So our business model is hosted accounts or pro support for self-hosted. Generally speaking, like a lot of schools, some governments will do hosted accounts, but really large corporations with a lot of compliance issues, they need to self-host internally, will sign up for pro support. And pro support is actually more expensive than a hosted account because, and that's a conscious choice that we made, because generally speaking, if there's a problem on our hosted account, it's either a software issue that I can easily reproduce, or it's a server issue that I can easily diagnose. And for support issues where we might actually be climbing through somebody else's network or not even be able to access it at all, somebody says it's broken, and I'm like, well, did you modify the database directly? And sometimes people don't know. If it's hosted on us, I know that you didn't. And so it becomes a lot harder to troubleshoot when somebody is self-hosted, so we make you pay more. And support isn't just things that are broken. There are lots of questions on workflow and best practices. A lot of our people, because we do have a cheap price point, we're inexpensive. And so what we get is a lot of people who are kind of new to asset management, and they sort of want to know, okay, well, what is the best practices and the best workflow for SNIPE-IT specifically? And so basically we have a policy of if a question gets asked more than twice, we add it to the docs whenever possible. And we don't do installs. We used to do paid installs, which I believe were $100 at a shot. And I once spent, I'm not kidding, 90 tickets back and forth with a customer, 90, that's 90, just trying to get an SSH key to work because they kind of didn't know what they were doing on the website because I'm talking to IT people, which don't always know web people or web technology. And it was 90 tickets. And so basically I'm like, nope, we're not doing that anymore. I would say the vast majority of our time is spent on support. So there a long time ago when this first started, we were not hosted on AWS Linux. We were hosted on a shared server. We are now on AWS Linux. Our hosting bill is only about $4,000 a month, and our monthly recurring revenue is about $65,000, and our annual recurring revenue is $770,000. We deploy using kind of a homegrown deployment script, which taps very heavily into AWS SSM. So as I said, we were not always on AWS Linux. We were once with a manual deployment, which meant that every sign up that we got from that crummy little PayPal button, I would get an email and then I would have to spend about 30 minutes manually setting somebody up and then emailing them. So we used to use Deploy HQ, which is a wonderful tool, just not for automating the types of things that we were doing. And then I think once we hit about 250 customers, we tried automating it. And of course, we tried automating it because I was going on a trip to Ireland. And we were like, okay, I don't want to be deploying people while I'm, at the cliffs of Moher. And so we automated it. And of course it broke, but we fixed it. That's okay. Our automated system right now works very, very well. And again, it's just kind of a series of bespoke scripts that speaks a lot to AWS SSM, and also we use callbacks from Laravel Cashier. So one of the questions I get a lot when it comes to starting a business at all, but also starting an open source business is, how do you figure out pricing? First of all, pricing is hard. Like that's simply true, and there's nothing you can kind of do about that. I will say you can usually charge more than you think. What I did, and this is maybe not like I didn't go to business school, this is just, I picked something that was similar to what we had and made sure I undercut them just a little bit. That said, we have raised our price once so far, and we really didn't get hurt by it at all. Also, being too cheap can hurt you. We've had customers or potential customers who are like, okay, I don't understand why you're so inexpensive. Are you selling our data? Like, there is a certain amount of trust that very large companies will have in you just because you charge a crap load of money. So just be aware of that. Depending on the kind of space that you're looking at getting into, if it's enterprisey, you're probably actually going to have to raise your prices, which I really sounds horrible, but it is what it is. So for us in our product, we chose not to do a per seat licensing cost. And part of that reason is there's extra code overhead in the FOSS product, which I didn't want to do. And I'll kind of go through my open source philosophy shortly. But it also, it encourages insecure practices. So what happens is when you have a company without a really big budget, and it doesn't mean they don't have that much money, it just means that they don't necessarily prioritize asset management or whatever your product is, and you're charging per seat. Basically, you get people sharing logins, and then when those people get fired, now how do you make sure that you're actually resetting the password for everything that you've shared logins for? So everything that we try and do in SNIPE-IT and in Grokability, the parent company, is kind of baked in to try and make sure that security is easier. So for that reason, I don't foresee us doing a per seat licensing cost. We could make a lot more money if we did. I don't feel right by it. But I did want to show you, so this is kind of a history of our annual recurring revenue and also our new signups. You can see there, that was when we increased our price by $10 a month. So we were, I think, $29.99, and then we raised it to $39.99. As you can see, it didn't actually have any impact at all, like still going up. And again, for this particular product, this is not a hockey stick product. This is not like, woo, crazy startup. We're all going to sell an IPO and make a $4 billion. This was completely bootstrapped. We don't have any VC funding or anything like that. And as you can see from that revenue, it just goes up in a nice, predictable, comfortable way. So my open source philosophy, I feel like I need to preface everything that I get into before this, with this, or after this, I should say. Don't try and be everything to everybody. We've definitely seen this before, where people are asking us for things that sound completely bonkers. You know, somebody asked if we could include a password manager in SNIPE-IT, and I'm like, password managers already exist. Why would I do that? So don't try and be everything to everybody. You're going to disappoint people, and you're going to make a clunky product that is way too much overhead, and that's going to be really unpleasant to maintain. Plus, as years go by, you're going to forget why you even implemented that product, that particular feature in the first place. You know, and as I said already, I really don't like to pollute the open source product with proprietary grokability business code. There are, for example, JavaScript snippets I could throw in there into the open source product that would tie back to our corporate billing. So we use a couple of different tools for billing and for determining whether or not somebody is overdue, or is like way overdue, or should be suspended, or if their credit card's about to expire. I could easily put that into the open source code, but I really feel like it's a really crummy thing to do. So we don't do that. We try really hard to make sure that any of the hosting specific stuff that we do is handled through those bespoke scripts that we have, those homegrown scripts, and we don't pollute up the actual open source project code. And just in general, we have a successful business because of free open source software, not just because that's where I got my start in programming, but also because the product, when it was very small, started to gain traction, and a lot of our business came from word of mouth. Another philosophy that I have is that UX matters and is often lacking in open source projects. One of the reasons why I decided to write my own version of this was because the other product, the UX on it was so miserable that it took 15 minutes to get anything done. And so I always try and make sure that we take UX into consideration, and we're always very careful about that. Also, because of our license, our AGPL license, we don't write custom code for customers, but if a customer comes to us with a feature request that actually sounds like it makes sense for most people, we'll try really hard to get that implemented as soon as we can. So obviously, step one is identify a need. What problem are you trying to solve? Find the product that you want to build. My advice is always solve real world problems, even if they seem niche. IT asset management is niche, and it's a super, super, super crowded market space. You know what? It still worked. Preferably, come up with a product in a space that you already know or can level up in quickly. I had already been working in IT for several years. I had already been doing this type of work, and so it made a lot of sense for me to make this. Also, remember, I hadn't planned on making any money off of it. It was just a side project. And also consider what is going to make your product better than what already exists out there. Step two, obviously, build your MVP. Start writing code. First, figure out your license, then start writing code. Remember that it doesn't have to be perfect to start with. You know, if you look at some of the alpha versions of SNIPE-IT, it was a little embarrassing. I was just getting to learn Laravel, and it was a little frustrating. And there were definitely a ton of mistakes made, but I still got people who were interested in it and encouraged me. And so we moved from there. And then, of course, release, put it in people's hands. You're not going to know what people need or what they want until you've actually put it in people's hands. Just a quick touch base on licenses, GPL versus AGPL. Under the GPL, someone can take your source code, make changes to it, and create a SaaS business around it, and they won't be required to disclose their changes. Under the AGPL, someone can take your source code, make changes to it, and create a SaaS business around it, but they are required to disclose their code changes. I can tell you that not everybody does this. We have a bunch of kind of SNIPE-IT clones in Singapore that have made changes, renamed it, changed a whole bunch of code, and they don't really follow up on it, but they're kind of not worth trying to hire a lawyer in Singapore to try and enforce that license. Step three, iterate and listen. So listen to the free open source users who are asking you for things, but always keep your vision in the forefront. You have to be the steward of this project. And if you listen to everything that everybody wants from you, good luck with that. You're going to be building stuff and you're going to have a big, horrific mess. But listen to them on UX UI challenges, and especially listen to them on use cases you hadn't considered. So for example, I built SNIPE-IT with the consideration of a normal corporation. As soon as we started getting schools interested, we had no idea. The workflow would be totally different. The use case here is that unlike a corporation, you're hiring and firing 10,000 people in a clip. And so bulk actions were super duper important. And it wasn't something that, like, in my experience working at an ad agency, that I would ever have to worry about. So these use cases that come through in the open source side are really, really interesting, and may and probably should inform the product that you're building. Your users may not be who you thought they would be. As I said, I was expecting just, regular companies, and that's not what we ended up with. You'll also may run into some scaling issues with unusual use cases. One of our customers has 500,000 licenses, and for as much test data as I can throw into the system, it actually exposed some database architectural decisions that probably I would not have made if I had known that somebody was going to be using it for 500,000 licenses. Also accept that sometimes you might be wrong, and that's okay. Also accept sometimes that the user is wrong. That is okay too. At the end of the day, you are the steward of this project. Hard part is kind of knowing the difference. Next, you need to figure out your business model. Yes, and keep things simple until you know it's viable as a business. So I can't stress this enough. You don't want to spend a year developing something, release it, and then find out that nobody actually wanted it in the first place. Starting small will help you with that. Always keep your ears to the ground. So, like, for example, we started hearing about SNIPE-IT being referred to on Reddit and on the Mac admins Slack channel. And so always be willing to kind of respond there and be really supportive and cultivate that strong FOSS community. Be responsive and supportive, be understanding and thankful. And honestly, if you're getting frustrated, use GIFs. I know that sounds stupid, but it has made me a lot nicer on GitHub. So test the business waters. So figure out your business model, and also figure out what you're good at, what resources you have, and what do you enjoy doing. So for us, we decided with software as a service. There are certainly other potential business models such as consulting and professional services. I didn't want to be a consultant again. I've done it before and it wasn't my thing. Freemium is obviously great, but it's harder in open source, again, because you kind of got to build in a whole bunch of things into your code that actually kind of stifle it, and they sort of pollute up the code base. You can certainly do commercial plugins. Donation-based or bounty-based pre-order and crowdfunding, I think if you're actually trying to build a long-standing business, are a little bit risky, but if you've got the support, then absolutely do it. Remember to start small. You can always add automations later. As I said, I was manually deploying this stuff, and that sucked. But as soon as we needed to, we automated it. And also make sure you have a solid channel for paid feedback. You really want people to start to love your product. Know when to get help. Learn as much as you can, but lean on the community. Once you've established that really good free open source community group, you've got people who likely have skills that you don't have. Lean on them, ask them for help. Step 6, shore up your weaknesses and play to your strengths. So for us, support is the commercial product. Always be responsive and helpful. And for example, use tools. The GitHub issue templates and canned responses have saved us a ton of time, and also saved my aggravation, because when somebody is literally not using the issue template, I have a canned response that saves me from having to negotiate how I'm going to be nice to this person when I really don't want to. And keep listening and keep improving. This all sounds kind of obvious, but you can get a little caught up in the open source space. And so I think it's really important. There are certainly lots of challenges in free open source software to begin with. Balancing your features with your product vision. Drive-by pull requests, which is like somebody you've never heard of creates a giant pull request with a feature, and then you never hear from them again. And now you've got to support this feature for the rest of your life. Pull requests for features you don't want. This happens a lot because people don't always ask. And I was in the developer documentation, we always say, ask and talk to me about how I would like this approach, because otherwise you're going to waste your own time. I'm not going to merge that pull request if it's for a feature that I think doesn't make sense. Clear upgrade paths can be challenging, especially within database versions. Certainly well, actually, I'll talk to you in a minute about FLYSYSTEM stuff. Also, you're going to get a whole bunch of unreasonable requests. I don't know if you can see this particular screenshot, but somebody actually opened a feature request asking us to rewrite SNIPE-IT from Laravel into the Go framework, which was obviously closed with a won't fix and an LOL tag, because that's insane. More challenges. Keeping localization files in sync with versions can definitely be tricky. We use a tool called Crowdin, which makes it a little bit easier, but we've never gotten the kind of branch integration thing to work exactly right. Also, just a side note, don't do what I did. I, of course, was trying to be super organized, and so I have 1,000 different language files for each of the different purposes that they have, and I have deep regrets about that, and we'll probably actually need to figure out a way to consolidate them without losing the translations that we already have, because we have about 30 different translations, I think. Translated into 30 languages. You can also limit your technology choices. It can limit your technology choices because of difficulty. So for example, if we really wanted to integrate something more deeply, like a better queuing system that was really tailored to what we needed, most of our open source users they're IT people. They're not going to know how to set up RabbitMQ. They're just not going to know this stuff. And so we can stack on all this really cool technology, but it was going to basically mean that we either become unavailable for a vast majority of our users, or we end up with a crap load more support because they don't know how to do the thing that they're trying to do. And also just emotionally, it kind of sucks because you only hear from people when something is broken or doesn't work as they want to. Unusual use cases can mean denormalizing schemas quickly. As I said, that at 500 or 500,000 licenses, there was another case where we on our assets table, we also have an activity table join, which means that if we wanted to show a count of how many times something had been checked out, checked in, and requested, we had to do that really nasty join, which is fine when you have 2,000 items, but when you have 500,000 items, you're actually starting to put some real stress on the database. And so we had to denorm that. And people will work around your feature limitations in strange and horrifying ways. We've seen all kinds of things where people will use custom fields in ways that they're not supposed to be used. But I mean, I can't really stop them. We just have to learn from it, and you have to figure out if there's a better way to help them solve the problem that they're trying to solve. Also, testing performance at scale can be challenging. As I said, 500,000 licenses. I know for me, if I try and seed the database with anything more than 100,000, memory gets exhausted. It just really can be a bear. Obviously burnout and GitHub users behaving badly. I'm not even gonna bother with that one. It's just, if you work in open source, you've seen this already. Also just in terms of upgrading. So I kind of touched on this before, different upgrade paths. So we have a couple of different ways that you can install and upgrade. Git checkout is my preferred. Direct download sucks, but people do it. We have a Docker as well. We have an upgrade script, which kind of does all the maintenance-y stuff like Composer install and clearing out caches and things like that. And then somebody uploaded a broken AMI in the AWS Marketplace, which we still get asked to support somehow, which I obviously don't because it's not ours. So challenges in a FOSS business. One of the things that I alluded to before is tying in billing. If somebody is if you're running a software as a service company and somebody hasn't paid their bill, how does the application that you're hosting know that? And so that can be really tricky. The way that we handle that, late payments, cancellations, and our data retention policy is once again using AWS SSM to kind of manage that, where it will talk to corporate and then corporate will reach out to AWS to decide to PHP artisan down to cancel it or suspend. You also don't have as much flexibility in terms of app usage. So for example, on a closed source product, I would probably use something like Crazy Egg, which allows heat mapping. You can track some data on how people are using the application itself, so you can tailor it and make it better and improve those features. And without that information, you just don't have it. And so that's really frustrating. You sort of have to rely on what people are telling you they're using it as opposed to actually being able to see what they're doing and really focus on either improving a bad experience or expanding on a feature that is enormously popular. And the obvious thing here is if you're supporting a free product as well as your paid product, you now have twice the support load. Also, we are our own competition in a crowded marketplace. Like, we've literally had people who have canceled their hosting account, and when we ask them why, they say, oh, we're moving to self-hosted. I'm like, oh, bummer. However, fortunately, it tends to work the other way. We get far more people who tried it out in a self-hosted environment, and then they just decided they didn't want to deal with managing another server, and so they send us their backup and we import them. We also have there's a tricky bit here because we don't want to build in any kind of a backdoor, but sometimes, and in fact, most of the time, if a customer is complaining about an issue with the install, we need to look at it. We need to see, like, can we reproduce this on their instance? Can we reproduce it locally? And so we create a service user when the application is deployed. And sometimes they'll delete it or whatever. And I don't like having to add a user and kind of junking up their user space. But the only other alternative there really is to write in a backdoor into the open source product. And I'm not willing to do that. So challenges in free open source with Laravel. And first, let me say, I love Laravel. I would not be, I would obviously not be talking at Laracon, but we would not have such a successful business without Laravel. And I owe Laravel a lot. However, there are definitely some frustrations and challenges that can sometimes come through with creating an open source product that is run on Laravel. It can be a little unpleasant when running from a subdirectory. Again, most of our users are not web people, they're IT people. And so while this probably in the space that you and I live in wouldn't be necessarily that difficult to tackle, just making sure that they don't have their env file hanging out in the wind, it can be challenging. And a lot of people do want to run it in a subdirectory. Also, we've seen some kind of weird, unpredictable behaviors behind proxies, reverse proxies and load balancers, specifically as it relates to the asset URL, the asset shortcut, the helper. We've just seen some weird stuff where port numbers will be dropped. And so it can be a little frustrating. Also, when the framework changes, we've got a lot more overhead. The new storage path in Laravel 6, how do you make sure that the changes have been applied? We've got users who literally come to us with a version 1. We're working on version 5, but if the files have always been there and if they're upgrading from some other point in time, I can say, make sure that you run this console command that will move those files for you. But if you miss that step in the upgrade path, basically the upgrade path becomes a lot more complicated, because now I've got to say, okay, if you're upgrading from version 4 to literally anything, make sure that you run this particular console command. And lots of times people are going to forget to do it. And so that basically means that now we've got some more support tickets. And the other just kind of small thing, or another small thing, is at least it was when we were looking at it, this may have changed, but view translations were kind of held separately, and it makes it really difficult to integrate that into the crowd-in platform and make sure that everything's being synced over normally. Also, supporting multiple operating systems is always tricky. We've run into some stuff. We use the fantastic SPADI backup system to allow users to create backups of their system. Include, their uploaded files in their database. And we've run into some weird stuff with like really long file names because somebody's got this tucked away somewhere in some subdirectory on Microsoft. And it can just cause things to fail weirdly. Another issue, so database versions can cause back-in-time migration headaches. This is my least favorite. I obviously always recommend against doing any kind of back-in-time migration change. So in other words, you wrote a migration 3 years ago, and now you have to change it back in time. You have to actually edit that. Obviously, all migrations should be changed forward. However, in one circumstance that we just had, there was a change with the MySQL update that actually caused the install to fail. And so although I'd created a migration to change that moving forward, I actually had to go back in time, because otherwise people would not be able to install the app and therefore could not run the migration that sort of fixed it post. So that can be kind of frustrating. It can be considered difficult to install. I don't think it is, but clearly some of our users have. This is an actual shot from our help desk. I certainly cannot change my document route on a server running multiple open source apps. Other open source apps work seamlessly with little to no modification on the Apache web server. Your app is from the Stone Age because it's practically manual. And then the last response was, yes, I will try better apps, and of course, spread the word on your low quality app. So that's fun. Challenges in hosting free open source Laravel. You have to move a lot of options out of the .env in order to make them user customizable. So obviously we wouldn't do that with database settings or AWS keys, because obviously that would expose our own database settings and AWS keys. But for example, the reply to address or the from address in your mail settings. So we have to store all of those in the database in order to allow people to actually customize them, allow our users to customize them, our customers, I should say. Users, since they can modify the .env file, they could potentially modify them all they want. However, our customers, we need to extend out a level of flexibility and customization, which would normally be handled through the .env, but since they can't modify the .env, we have to then add this middleware layer where we're reaching out to the settings table to find out what they've overridden it with. And again, like, you can't do that with AWS keys. If I said, okay, upload your own or insert your own AWS key so you can use your own S3 bucket, without writing a lot of extra code to figure out whether or not they were a hosted customer or not, we could potentially be exposing our own internal information. Deployments and upgrades, we've pretty much nailed that at this point, again, because of these bespoke deployment scripts that we have, but can still always sometimes be a little challenging. You know, Composer can act a little squirrely sometimes, or permission on a directory gets donked up. So because we have this really unique environment where each customer for us has their own Laravel install, that means we have 2,000 individual installs. And we've actually run out of inodes before, where we were getting all kinds of weird server issues. We couldn't really reproduce it, but because Laravel has a lot of small files, we had plenty of disk space, but we actually ran out of inodes. Also, 2,000 Composer installs can be slow. So when you're upgrading people, you have to figure out a way around that. We have a local GitHub checkout and a local Composer install, which we then rsync over, which is a lot faster of a process. And it also means that if GitHub is down or if Packagist is down, we're not stuck, unable to upgrade or unable to complete an upgrade or deployment. So again, deployment on sign up without polluting the open source project. As I said, we use webhooks and AWS SSM on the cashier webhook callbacks, which has pretty much solved that problem pretty well. And you want to tie in billing without polluting the open source project. Secure environment, as I mentioned, we don't always have access to common Linux commands. Our setup is weird. Not only do we have 2,000 installs across all of our servers, not 2,000 on one server, but 2,000 across all of our servers, but they're also in a secure chrooted environment. And when you're in a chrooted environment, which once again, I did that to protect my customers from my crummy code, what that means is that you don't always have all of the base Linux commands that you'd be really used to having access to. And so on that deployment, we're actually literally pulling over C libraries so that we have access to some of the more basic stuff that we need. Some of the other challenges is like notifications going to multiple email accounts. It's not really specific to hosted Laravel, but for example, because of the way notifications had been done, it's not always the user, it's not always the admin. Sometimes it's an alternate address. And so there was just a lot of working around that we had to go through in order to get that to work as expected. And I still think it's a little bit clunky. And also occasionally some unpredictable validation with soft deletes, since people can create a thing, delete it, create a thing, delete it, create a thing. If they try and create it again, because of the way that the validation used to work. Now they may have fixed that in a later version, but I actually had to write a unique undeleted function in the validation provider, which basically said, even if it's deleted, or if it's not deleted, you can have 40 records that are deleted, but if it's not deleted, then we still want to allow it. FLYSYSTEM challenges. This is something that we've been going through recently. We're trying to switch over. We are in the middle of trying to switch over to S3 for uploaded file hosting. But most of our free open source users are going to stick with local uploads. And so we have to be really careful that we don't kind of bone them over in the effort to make our hosted platform better. We wanted to keep the existing file structure so that users who forgot that step don't end up with broken files. I'm pretty much, I think I'm going to give up. I think I'm just going to do the symlink thing and we're just going to move files. It's just been too frustrating to try and maintain the structure that we had, because we also have this concept of public versus private files, where our private files are uploaded in the storage directory, but the public files were uploaded in the public directory, and the private files are delivered via download that actually checks for a gate to determine whether or not you're even allowed to see that file. So like, if you're not allowed to see assets, I don't want you looking at asset files. If you're not allowed to see licenses, I don't want you looking at license files. So we already had this concept, and it's been really frustrating trying to get all of that integrated. I'm actually just going to drop these here. Foreign keys are mostly awful. At least in open source. Every single time I've tried to make something with foreign keys, because you don't really know how the product is going to end up, not that there is an end up, it's just sort of never ending, but because the scope changes and everything else changes so much, I've run into nothing but tears there. Enums are awful, try and avoid them if you can. And Laravel scheduler implementation is awful for us. So it seems great on paper, I love the idea. But the problem is when you have, 300, 400, 500 accounts on a server, you're waking up a PHP process multiple hundreds of times a minute. And no matter how big and beefy your server is, you can melt your server that way. So it's also a little brittle in response to timing, since you're kind of baking that stuff in. What if a customer wants, so I've got here, expiring alerts is daily, inventory alerts is daily. What if they want them weekly? So now I've got to kind of override that as well. So our way around that was just when we create the cron tab for those users, we just actually individually invoke those alerts by hand at kind of a randomized time, so that no one process is going to be spawning all over the place. Some tools that we use Baremetrics for revenue insights and dunning emails. If you don't know, dunning emails are the, hey, you're late with your bill email. We like them a lot. The graph that I showed you, the ARR and MRR graphs, those come from Baremetrics. We use Stripe for payment processing, obviously. We use Slack for team communications. We use Crowdin for user-friendly translating. It's a nice platform, and they do have they have a free version for open source projects. So if you're going to be doing an open source project, even I think if you charge for it, if you reach out to them, then they will, they'll help you with that. And we use Rollbar for real-time error monitoring on our corporate website, the one that you actually sign up for an account with, and on the individual instances. I think probably one of the best decisions that I made in this entire journey was implementing Rollbar, just because we can jump right on top of things. Sometimes it's something as dumb as the Slack endpoint that they have for their notification. If the checkout notification, they've got the wrong endpoint there, or somebody else changed the endpoint, we can actually just either go in and disable that Slack endpoint from our end, so that it doesn't try and post to an invalid endpoint, or we can reach out to them and say that something's wrong. Same thing with LDAP integration. It really gives us a handle on what's going on. We use custom Slack bots for a ton of things, and I'm sure I already mentioned Spadey.me. I think I run half of my business on their tools, and I'm really grateful for it. But we use I think it's actually deprecated, but we still use it, the custom Slack bot stuff that they have. So we use Slack bots for things like disabling LDAP. If somebody's donked up their LDAP server, and we literally can't even contact it to say this is bad, it can occasionally cause a 502 error. And so we can just disable LDAP for that customer right through Slack. We can edit some customer data. We also use a lot of reporting, so weekly sign-up reports, undeleting our service account user because then we can't log in. And it allows our team to be able to kind of do a lot of the maintenance-y things that we need. We also have a Slack bot that's it's OMG, which is like when we get a sign up from somebody we've heard of and we're super excited about it, then we mark them as OMG. So this is just kind of what the Slackbot output looks like, just in case it's useful. So if I look up, this is obviously a demo user, which is me. You can see we provide all kinds of information through there, what the account holder name is, what region they're in, what time zone they're in, what the current local time is, so we don't try and call them if we're trying to call them back, what language they signed up with, blah, blah, blah. And so it's just super duper helpful stuff. We also have kind of the weekly report, which allows us to take a week out of time and figure out what our percent gain was, or what our net gain was, which is always very cool. And then we actually have more, so we can activate. I can add a tweet to our testimonials page right from Slack. We've got some Let's Encrypt certbot stuff in there. List of current customers, DNS lookup, finding information about a customer. We also have a translation for America time, because our QA engineer is in Maine and she is German, and so she always does it in military time, and my tiny brain can't always handle that because I know too many 80s song lyrics. Also some LDAP reports. We can roll back to a previous database dump that's generated by Spadey Backup right from Slack. So there's some really cool stuff that we're doing, and it's basically allowed us to not have to do a lot of the kind of admin user panel type of thing, which is pretty neat. So just to give you an idea of what this looks like for our SSM stuff, this is one of our methods, which is in our corporate file base. But so enable hosted, as you can see here, all we're doing is effectively reaching out to AWS using the SSM tool and running a command, for example, in this case, PHP artisan up. So it's really neat. That integration gives us a lot of flexibility, and that's what we tie into in our Slack integration. So as I said, Slack bots allow our staff to quickly and easily make modifications to customer data in the corporate database. But what's really important here is somebody that, for example, our first line of help desk support, her name is Victoria. She doesn't typically need direct server access, and because she doesn't need it, I kind of don't want her to have it. And so this allows her to be able to perform a lot of stuff that she would have to come to the systems administration people for, right from Slack, in a really well controlled and safe environment. So the question is, what would I do differently? Possibly multi-tenant using Nginx variables for database credentials and other specific stuff. I'm still not entirely convinced of that because of the compromises that I might have to make for the open source product. I'd probably do S3 from the get-go just to avoid this whole FLYSYSTEM transition thing. Maybe lean a little heavier on Docker. We did it for cost reasons, or we chose not to do it for cost reasons. Because again, I was running this on a shared host for the first probably 6 months. I didn't know whether or not it was really going to work. I didn't know whether or not there was a real business here. Definitely fewer translation files, as I mentioned, because those things are awful now. Also, no monthly support packages. What we would find, because our support package, I think at the time was $50 a month, something, 40 bucks a month. People would sign up for 1 month, we'd help them install it, and then they'd cancel. And so we've taken that option away. There is no more monthly support. It's just, we invest way too much time in it. It doesn't work for us. Also enterprise support for security questionnaires. They take forever. And I think I probably would have leaned more on traits for things that are checkoutable, things that you can check out too. So when I originally created it, you could only check stuff out to users, because to me, from a responsibility standpoint, how can a location be responsible for an asset? And the whole point of a system like this is that you have a way to hold people accountable for the stuff that they're responsible for. So I didn't build it with the notion of things would be checked out to locations or other assets or kinds of other things that people have asked me for. And so I probably would have leaned more on traits for that. We're working on fixing it. It's just, yeah, projects change in ways you don't expect. And I know this all sounded very doom and gloom and lots of frustrations and lots of blah, blah, blah. But truly, don't be discouraged. I'm absolutely thrilled with the choice that we've made. There are a lot of really good reasons to make your business open source. You're going to learn a ton. You're going to help a ton of other people. You're going to get faster feedback, because nobody is more entitled to something than people who are getting it for free, weirdly. And you'll also understand your use cases in more depth. Customers are a little less likely to reach out to you and tell you how they're using your stuff. And so you get a lot more of that feedback on GitHub. And that's it. I hope you go out there and you make some really kick-ass software, and I can't wait to see it on GitHub.
All right. Awesome. Really, really great. Yeah, I'll just reiterate one little thing that you said at the end there that I think people do not give enough consideration to, is the idea of pricing things annually, because it's just like so ingrained in everybody that like monthly, but annual is just so much easier a lot of times in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely. And especially if you're building a business-to-business product.
Yeah.
I mean, most of our customers actually ask for that. They want that. They're like, do you have an annual? Because they have to figure out their annual billing budgets. Like if you're signing up for IT asset management and you're just like a family, I mean, good for you. That's an awesome level of organization, but you don't have to worry about getting your IT budget approved. And so for B2B, I think definitely annual should always be an option.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much. Great job.